It tore across the ridgeline like a living thing with teeth, clawing at the cabin's weathered logs, searching for any crack, any weakness to exploit. Inside, the fire had burned down to embers that glowed like angry eyes in the darkness. The only other light came from a single oil lamp on the table, casting shadows that danced and twisted across the walls like specters. He sat in the corner, motionless, not sleeping, never sleeping, just existing. His name was Marcus Webb, though no one had called him that in 3 years. Up here, in these mountains, he was just the guy in the high cabin, the recluse, the ghost, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The cabin was 15 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by a treacherous trail that became impassable once the snow started falling, which it had, for 3 days now. The drifts outside were already chest-high, and according to the weather radio crackling in the corner, another storm system was rolling in from the northwest. Perfect. Marcus reached for the bottle on the table. His hand, still steady, always steady, that training never left you, wrapped around the glass neck. But he didn't drink. Instead, his eyes fixed on the object next to it. A silver watch. Not expensive. The crystal was cracked. The leather band was worn almost through in places. But the engraving on the back was still legible, even in the dim light. He didn't need to look at it. He'd memorized those words years ago. To Jake, my brave boy. Love, Dad. The watch had stopped at 3:47. It would always be 3:47. A sudden bang against the door made him move. Fast, fluid, the old instincts firing before conscious thought could catch up. He was on his feet, hand on the knife at his belt, before the sound registered as something else. Not a threat, just the wind. Or maybe another bang, then a sound, a whimper. Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides and yanked open the door. The cold hit him like a punch to the chest, stealing his breath despite the thick flannel shirt and thermal layers. Snow swirled in, immediately melting on the warm floorboards. And there, on his porch, was a dog. She was medium-sized, maybe 40 pounds, with a coat that might have been golden once but was now matted with ice and mud. Her ribs showed through her fur. One ear was torn, an old injury that had healed badly. But her eyes, dark brown, almost black in the lamplight, looked up at him with something that wasn't quite hope but wasn't quite resignation either. She whimpered again. No. The word came out harsh, final. Marcus had learned that lesson the hard way. You don't let things in. You don't get attached. Everything you care about gets taken away, or worse, gets hurt because of you. Get out of here. The dog didn't move. Marcus stomped his boot on the porch. The dog flinched but held her ground. Tail tucked, body pressed low. Stubborn. I said get out. He didn't kick her. Despite everything, despite the rage that lived in his chest like a second heart, he didn't kick her. But he slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame, hard enough to send a clear message. Through the window, he watched her slink off the porch into the darkness, limping slightly on her left rear leg. Good. Maybe she'd find her way to one of the other cabins down the mountain. Someone with a softer heart. Someone who wouldn't poison everything they touched. Marcus returned to his chair, picked up the bottle, and this time he did drink. The watch stared at him from the table. 3:47. Always 3:47. The next morning arrived the way all mornings did in the high country during winter. Slowly, grudgingly, as if the sun itself was reluctant to face another day. Marcus woke at 0500 hours, his body still operating on military time despite 3 years of civilian life. Not that his life was particularly civilian. Out here, survival demanded its own kind of discipline. Water to haul, firewood to split, perimeter to check. The routine kept him alive. More importantly, it kept him from thinking. He pulled on his boots and thermal jacket, grabbed the axe from beside the door, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold was a living thing, pressing against his exposed skin, searching for any warmth to steal. His breath came out in great white plumes that hung in the still air. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a world transformed. Everything was white, pristine, untouched. The kind of beauty that poets wrote about and that made Marcus's jaw clench. Beautiful things were just targets waiting to be destroyed. He was halfway to the woodpile when he saw it. The dog. She was back on his porch, lying near the door, covered in a fresh layer of snow. For a moment, just a moment, Marcus thought she might be dead, frozen solid during the night. But then he saw her side move. A shallow breath. Another. She'd stayed. Despite the cold. Despite his anger. Despite everything, she'd stayed. And she wasn't alone. Beside her, pressed against her belly for warmth, were 4 puppies. Marcus's mind went blank. Then it went into overdrive tactical assessment mode, kicking in automatically. The puppies were newborns, couldn't be more than a few days old. Their eyes were still closed. They were making small mewling sounds, instinctively searching for their mother's warmth. The mother dog's eyes were open now, watching him, but she didn't have the strength to lift her head. She was dying. The realization hit him with crystalline clarity. She'd given birth somewhere out in the wilderness, probably in a cave or under a fallen tree. But something had gone wrong. Maybe complications from the birth. Maybe an infection. Maybe just the cold and starvation catching up with her. She'd known she was dying, so she'd brought her puppies to the only shelter she could find, his porch. Damn it! Marcus stood there, axe hanging forgotten in his hand, staring at this impossibility. This intrusion into his carefully constructed isolation. He could walk away, go back inside, let nature take its course. That's what the old Marcus would have done. The Marcus before. But another voice spoke up, quieter, older. A voice he'd been trying to drown for 3 years. You're a protector. That's what we do. That's what you are. His brother Jake's voice. Marcus knelt beside the dog. Her breathing was labored, each inhalation a visible effort. He'd seen enough death to recognize it. She had hours, maybe less. But the puppies might make it if he acted fast. He'd performed triage in firefights, assessed casualties under enemy fire, kept teammates alive with holes in their bodies that should have been fatal. This was just a dog and her pups. Simple. Except it wasn't simple at all. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the mother's vitals by feel. Weak pulse, fever, dehydration, likely internal bleeding from the birth. Nothing he could do for her. But the puppies, all right? He said quietly, speaking to the dog, to himself, to the ghost of his brother. All right? He scooped up 2 of the puppies, tiny, impossibly fragile things that fit in one hand, and tucked them inside his jacket against his chest. Their mother watched, and Marcus could swear he saw understanding in those dark eyes. Trust. I'm coming back, he told her. Stay with me. Inside he worked fast, built up the fire until it roared, grabbed towels and blankets, created a makeshift bed in the wooden crate that had once held his ammunition supplies. His old first aid kit, extensive because SEALs learned to be prepared for everything, yielded gauze, antibiotic ointment, and a bottle of glucose solution. He made 4 trips, bringing in all the puppies first, then finally carefully carrying the mother. She was heavier than she looked despite her emaciation, and he could feel every bone through her matted fur. He laid her on the blanket nest he'd created by the fire. She looked up at him and her tail moved. Just once. A weak thump against the floor. Don't thank me yet, Marcus muttered. I don't even know what I'm doing. But that was a lie. His hands knew. They'd always known. Check airway. Check breathing. Keep them warm. The puppies first, they were the most vulnerable. He rubbed them gently with warm towels, stimulating circulation, making sure they were breathing properly. Their tiny hearts beat against his palms like rapid-fire drumbeats. All 4 were alive. Weak but alive. The mother was another story. Marcus examined her with the same clinical precision he'd once used on injured teammates. The wounds on her body told a story. Old scars from fights or abuse, fresher cuts from navigating the wilderness, and the stretched, torn tissue from giving birth without help. She'd been through hell. He cleaned her wounds, applied antibiotic ointment, tried to get her to drink water with sugar dissolved in it for energy. She managed a few laps before her head dropped back down. Come on, Marcus heard himself say. You didn't make it this far to quit now. But even as he said it, he knew. He'd seen this too many times. The light starting to fade. The breathing becoming more labored. The way living things started to let go. He should have felt nothing. He'd trained himself to feel nothing. But as he sat there on the floor, this broken dog's head in his lap, her puppies mewling softly in their box, something inside him cracked. "Why did you come here?" he whispered. "Why me?" The dog's eyes found his. In them, he saw something he hadn't seen in 3 years of self-imposed exile. Something he'd thought he'd never deserve to see again. Forgiveness. She never saw the danger coming, and most people don't realize how fast everything can change. One moment you have control, the next you're fighting just to hold on. Subscribe to Silent Trident Stories so you're never caught off guard by what happens next. Because trust me, what unfolds in this cabin will shake you to your core. If you're still not subscribing, drop a comment. What's holding you back? The mother dog. Marcus had started calling her Amber in his head, because of her eyes, lasted through the first day. She lasted through the second. By the third day, Marcus had reorganized his entire life around these 5 animals. His cabin, once a monument to isolation and control, had become a nursery. The puppies needed to be fed every 2 hours. Amber needed constant monitoring. The fire needed to stay hot. Water needed boiling for sterilization. He hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a time in 72 hours. And he hadn't felt this alive in 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd come to these mountains to disappear, to punish himself in isolation, to make sure he could never hurt anyone else the way he'd hurt. No, he didn't let himself finish that thought. The old rules still applied. Don't remember, don't feel, don't let anything in. Except the rules were already broken, weren't they? Because here he was at 0300 hours on day 4, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a puppy the size of his fist sleeping in his palm, and Amber's head resting on his knee. She was still dying, but she was dying slower. Maybe that was worse. The puppy in his hand made a small sound, somewhere between a squeak and a yawn. Marcus found himself smiling. Actually smiling. For the first time in longer than he could remember. Then he caught himself, and the smile vanished. You don't get to be happy. Remember what you are. Remember what you did. You should eat something, he told Amber, though he knew she probably couldn't hear him anymore. Her breathing had taken on that rattling quality. Death breathing. He'd heard it in Kandahar, in Ramadi, in a dozen other places whose names still woke him up at night. But this was different. This wasn't enemy fire or IEDs or the chaos of combat. This was just life. The natural end of it. Somehow that made it harder. Marcus carefully placed the puppy back with its siblings. He'd named them too, though he pretended he hadn't. Scout, Bear, River, and the smallest one, the runt who fought hardest for every meal, he'd called Tank. He checked Amber's vitals again. Pulse steady, temperature dropping. Any medic would have called it. Time of death, approximately 0315 hours. But Marcus wasn't ready to call it. Jake would have loved you, he found himself saying. The words came out before he could stop them, breaking a 3-year silence. My brother. He was always bringing home strays, birds with broken wings, cats from the shelter. One time, he found a raccoon caught in a fence and spent 4 hours freeing it. Got bit 3 times. Mom had to take him for rabies shots. Amber's ear twitched. Maybe she could hear him after all. He wanted to be a veterinarian. Had it all planned out. College, then vet school, then he was going to open a practice in Montana. Somewhere like this. Somewhere beautiful. Marcus's hand moved to his pocket, pulling out the watch. Felt heavier tonight. Or maybe he was just tired. I enlisted first. Became a SEAL. Jake was so proud. Kept my graduation photo on his desk. Told everyone his big brother was a warrior. Marcus's voice cracked. I was supposed to protect people. That's what SEALs do. We're supposed to be the ones who run toward danger, who stand between the innocent and the wolves. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Another storm rolling in. I was overseas on my 3rd deployment when Jake turned 18. He enlisted too. Wanted to be just like his big brother. Marcus closed his eyes. I should have stopped him. Should have told him to go to college, chase his dream, stay safe. But I was so damn proud. My little brother, following in my footsteps. Amber's breathing changed. Slower, deeper. He made it through basic. Made it through his first deployment. Second deployment, they assigned him to a convoy security detail. Routine mission. Escort some supply trucks from one base to another. I wasn't even in the same country. Marcus's hands were shaking now. The watch felt like it was burning his palm. IED. Hidden in a dead dog on the side of the road. They used a dead animal because they knew Americans would stop to move it off the road. They knew we'd. He stopped. Breathed. Jake was the first one out of the vehicle. He saw the dog and he couldn't just leave it there. Even dead. Even in a war zone, he couldn't. The numbers on the watch face blurred. 347. The medic said it was instant. Said he didn't feel anything. But I know better. I know what those devices do. I know what the last few seconds look like. And I know. His voice dropped to a whisper. I know it was my fault. If I hadn't enlisted. If I hadn't made it look so honorable. If I had just told him no. Amber lifted her head. Barely, but she lifted it. And looked at him. In the firelight, her eyes seemed to glow. That's why I'm here, Marcus continued. The words pouring out now like water through a broken dam. That's why I push everyone away. Because everyone I care about gets hurt. My mom couldn't look at me after the funeral. My dad tried, but I could see it in his eyes. They'd lost one son to my choices. They weren't going to lose the other one too. He laughed. A bitter sound. So I left. Gave them what they wanted. Came up here where I can't hurt anyone else. Where I can just fade away. Because that's what I deserve, right? That's justice. Amber made a sound. Not a whimper. Something else. Her tail moved again, that same weak thump against the blanket. And then, this is the part Marcus would never be able to fully explain. The part that would haunt him in the best possible way for the rest of his life. She shifted. Used the last of her strength to move, positioning herself so her head rested more firmly against his leg. A gesture of comfort. She was dying, and she was comforting him. I don't deserve this, Marcus whispered. I don't deserve you. But Amber's eyes said different. They said what Jake would have said, if he could. They said what his parents couldn't say. They said what Marcus had needed to hear for 3 years but had been too afraid to listen to. You're not responsible for every bad thing that happens. You're not God. You're just a man who loved his brother. And love isn't a crime. Marcus sat with her through the night. Somewhere around 0500, the puppies woke up hungry, and he fed them one by one with the improvised bottle feeding system he'd created. Amber watched, her eyes tracking each pup as Marcus cared for them. I've got them, he promised her. I don't know how, but I'll figure it out. You made it this far. You brought them somewhere safe. You did good, Amber. You did real good. As the first gray light of dawn started seeping through the cabin windows, Amber's breathing began to slow. Marcus knew what was coming. He'd seen it too many times to be mistaken. He gathered her closer, careful not to hurt her, and began to speak softly. Old prayers his mother had taught him. Promises about green fields and clear water and no more pain. Things he hadn't believed in for years but found himself believing in now. And when the end came at 0632 hours, it came gently. One breath, another, then peace. Marcus sat there for a long time. This dog he'd known for less than a week cradled in his arms. And he cried. Really cried. For Amber. For Jake. For all the things he'd lost and all the things he'd thought he could never have again. The puppies stirred in their box. Already hungry again. Already demanding life continue. And somehow, impossibly, Marcus found himself ready to answer that demand. Most of us never realize we're broken until something forces us to feel again. If the story is hitting different, that's because it's real, the kind of truth that changes you. Subscribe now, because what happens next isn't just about survival. It's about transformation. And only subscribers get to see how this impossibility unfolds. Haven't hit that button yet? Comment below and tell us why. We read every single one. Marcus buried Amber at sunrise. He chose a spot on the ridge overlooking the valley, where the first light hit every morning. It took him 3 hours to dig through the frozen ground, and by the time he was done, his hands were bloody and his shoulders burned. It was the best pain he'd felt in years. He wrapped her in his cleanest blanket, the wool one his grandmother had made, the one he'd carried through 4 deployments, and lowered her gently into the ground. There was no ceremony. Marcus had been to too many funerals, sat through too many speeches about honor and sacrifice and the price of freedom. Instead, he just stood there and talked to her. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting me, for giving me a reason to wake up, for reminding me that maybe I'm not the monster I thought I was." He covered the grave, then spent another hour gathering stones to mark it. Nothing fancy, just a cairn the way they did in the mountains. Something that would last. When he finally walked back to the cabin, the sun was high and bright, and he was exhausted in a way that felt clean. Earned. Inside, the puppies were screaming. The next week was chaos. Newborn puppies, Marcus discovered, were needier than any special forces operator he'd ever trained. They needed feeding every 2 hours around the clock. They needed to be kept warm. They needed to be cleaned. They needed to be stimulated to eliminate, something their mother would have done naturally but that Marcus now had to do with warm, damp cloths. It was disgusting. It was exhausting. It was more work than he'd done in his entire time in the mountains. And he'd never felt more purposeful. His days developed a new rhythm. Wake at 0500. He never needed an alarm. Tank would start crying exactly at 0500, as if the little runt had his own internal clock. Feed the puppies. Clean the puppies. Check their vitals, weight, temperature, breathing. Scout was the biggest and always ate first. Bear was the calmest, content to wait his turn. River was adventurous, already trying to crawl despite being less than 2 weeks old. And Tank was the fighter. Tank had been born last and smallest. By all odds, he should have been the one who didn't make it. But he had this stubborn determination, this refusal to quit, that reminded Marcus of someone. Reminded him of Jake. Between feeding sessions, Marcus kept the cabin running. The storm that had blown in the night Amber died had been followed by 3 more. The snow was now 6 feet deep in places. The trail to civilization was completely impassable. The weather radio said the worst winter in 40 years. Marcus was completely cut off from the outside world, alone in a tiny cabin with 4 puppies who depended on him for everything. And for the first time since Jake's death, he wasn't drinking himself to sleep. On day 8, Scout opened his eyes. Marcus was in the middle of a feeding session, holding the puppy against his chest with one hand and the bottle with the other, when suddenly the pup was looking at him. Really looking with clear, focused awareness. "Hey there, buddy," Marcus whispered. "Welcome to the world." By day 10, all 4 puppies had their eyes open, and their personalities began to truly emerge. Scout was the leader, always first to explore, first to investigate new sounds. Bear was the peacekeeper, somehow naturally positioned in the middle of puppy piles, keeping his siblings calm. River was the wanderer, constantly trying to escape the confines of the crate. And Tank was devoted. Despite being the smallest, despite having to fight hardest for every meal, Tank always found his way to Marcus. Would cry until Marcus picked him up. Would fall asleep only when pressed against Marcus's chest, close enough to hear his heartbeat. "You're a clingy little thing, aren't you?" Marcus would say, but his voice was gentle, not annoyed. Because the truth was, Tank's need to be close didn't feel like a burden. Felt like trust. Felt like redemption. On day 12, Marcus was doing his evening patrol, checking the perimeter, making sure no trees had fallen on the cabin, ensuring the propane tank hadn't gotten buried, when he noticed something odd. Tracks in the snow. Fresh ones. Too big to be a rabbit or fox. Mountain lion. His tactical awareness kicked in immediately. He followed the tracks, reading the story they told. The cat had circled the cabin 3 times, had approached the door, had spent time near the window where the puppy's crate was positioned. It had smelled them. Marcus stood in the growing darkness, the wind cutting through his layers, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Something beyond the numbness, beyond the self-destructive apathy. Protective fury. These puppies were his. Not in the sense of ownership, but in the deeper sense that mattered. He was their protector, their guardian, and nothing, not a mountain lion, not a blizzard, not even his own guilt, was going to take them from him. He spent the next 2 hours reinforcing the cabin's defenses. Moved the wood pile to block the lower windows. Set up early warning systems with tin cans on string. Positioned his rifle near the door, loaded, safety on but ready. Then he sat by the puppy's crate, watching them sleep in their pile of blankets and brotherly warmth, and made a decision. He was done running, done hiding, done punishing himself. These 4 lives depended on him, and by God, he wasn't going to let them down. Right now you're probably thinking, this is just a story about dogs. But what if I told you it's really about the moment you realize you can't outrun your past, you can only face it? Every warrior knows that moment. It's coming for Marcus faster than he thinks. Subscribe before the next twist catches you off guard, because what shows up at that cabin door in 3 days will test everything he thought he knew about survival. Don't be the one who misses it. And if you're not subscribing, tell us in the comments. What would you have done differently? The mountain lion came back on day 14. Marcus was awake. He was always awake at 0300 now, thanks to Tank's feeding schedule when he heard the sound. Not a sound, really. More like the absence of sound. The particular quality of silence that meant something large and predatory was nearby. He was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window with the practiced silence of 20 years of training. The moon was nearly full, reflecting off the snow, turning the night into a landscape of silver and shadow. And there, 30 yards from the cabin, was the cat. She was magnificent, easily 140 pounds, all muscle and primal purpose. Her coat was tawny gold, and her eyes, even from this distance, glowed with that eerie reflection of moonlight that predators have. She was staring at the cabin, specifically at the window where the puppies slept. Marcus's finger moved to the trigger. An easy shot. He'd made harder kills at greater distances in worse conditions. One squeeze and the threat would be eliminated. But he didn't shoot. Maybe it was because the cat reminded him of Amber, that same desperate need to survive, to feed, to protect. Maybe it was because he'd had enough of death. Or maybe it was because some part of him understood that this creature was just doing what nature had designed her to do. She wasn't evil. She was just hungry. Still, the puppies were his and he'd made a promise. Marcus set down the rifle and grabbed the air horn he kept for emergencies. He opened the door, the cold rushing in like a physical blow, and stepped onto the porch. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the snow. "Not these. Find something else." The cat's ears went back. For a moment, Marcus thought she might charge. Mountain lions didn't typically attack humans, but they were unpredictable when starving. He raised the air horn and triggered it. The sound was apocalyptic in the silent night, echoing off the mountains, sending up clouds of snow from nearby trees. The cat bolted. Marcus stood on the porch, adrenaline singing through his veins, and laughed. Actually laughed out loud, because he'd just faced down a mountain lion in his pajamas with an air horn, all to protect 4 puppies who weren't even his. The old Marcus would have called it insane. The new Marcus thought it might be the first sane thing he'd done in years. Inside, the puppies were in an uproar, startled by the noise. Marcus gathered them up, letting them crawl all over him, their small bodies warm and alive and absolutely dependent on him staying alive in turn. "Sorry guys," he murmured. "Just keeping the neighborhood safe." Tank burrowed into the space between Marcus's arm and his ribs, let out a small sigh, and went back to sleep. Trust. The next few days brought a new challenge. The puppies were growing. At 3 weeks old, they were mobile. Really mobile. The crate that had seemed spacious was now a prison. They wanted to explore, to play, to engage with the world. So Marcus puppy-proofed the cabin. It was harder than any tactical operation he'd ever planned. Every dangling cord became a hazard. Every corner became a trap. The cabin that had been designed for one reclusive human suddenly had to be safe for four adventurous, idiotic, absolutely fearless puppies. He moved everything breakable to high shelves, blocked off the fireplace, created a play area with barriers made from old boxes, spread blankets and towels everywhere because accidents were constant and inevitable. His pristine, controlled, isolated sanctuary became chaos incarnate. And he loved it. Scout was the first to discover his reflection in the window, leading to an hour-long standoff with the other puppy that left Marcus in stitches. Bear figured out how to knock over the water bowl, creating a small indoor lake that River immediately began playing in. Tank, true to form, stayed close to Marcus, following him everywhere, tripping him constantly. "You're going to get stepped on," Marcus warned. Not for the first time. Tank just wagged his tail and kept following. The days blurred together. Feeding, cleaning, playing, training. Yes, training because Marcus couldn't help himself. These puppies were going to be disciplined, well-behaved dogs, even if it killed him. He started simple. Sit, stay, come. Using the techniques he'd learned watching military working dog handlers. Positive reinforcement. Consistency. Patience. Scout picked it up immediately, always eager to please. Bear learned through observation, watching Scout and then mimicking. River had the attention span of a goldfish but eventually got the basics. Tank only had eyes for Marcus. The little runt would do anything Marcus asked, not because he understood commands, but because Marcus was his whole world. Where Marcus went, Tank followed. When Marcus sat, Tank sat. When Marcus stood, Tank stood. It should have been annoying. It should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like forgiveness. On day 23, something changed. Marcus was outside chopping wood. A never-ending task in winter, when he heard the sound. A helicopter. Distant but getting closer. The snow had finally stopped. The sky had cleared. And apparently the mountain rescue service was doing wellness checks on the remote cabins. Marcus stood there, axe in hand, listening to the chop-chop-chop of rotors getting louder. Part of him wanted to wave them off. He was fine. Better than fine. He had food, fuel, and 4 puppies depending on him. But another part, the part that was slowly, painfully coming back to life, knew that isolation wasn't sustainable. The puppies would need vaccinations soon, proper food, medical care, and maybe he needed people too. The helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, bright orange against the blue sky. It circled once, and Marcus saw the pilot gesture. They'd seen him. They knew he was alive. Then they moved on to the next cabin, satisfied. But the moment stayed with Marcus. Because he'd realized something, he could leave. The trail would be passable in a few weeks. He could hike down with the puppies, get back to civilization, re-enter the world. The question was, did he want to? That night, he sat by the fire with all 4 puppies piled around him. Scout was chewing on an old rope toy. Bear was sprawled across Marcus's lap, snoring softly. River was investigating the fascinating mystery of his own tail. And Tank was curled against Marcus's side, small head on his thigh, trusting and safe. "What do you think, guys?" Marcus asked quietly. "Time to face the world again?" No one answered, of course. They were dogs. But as Marcus looked around the cabin, at the chaos, the warmth, the life that had invaded his carefully constructed tomb, he knew the answer. He'd come to these mountains to die, slowly, painfully, in isolation. Instead, he'd found a reason to live. For reasons, actually. The crisis came on day 31. Marcus had been congratulating himself on getting the hang of this whole puppy-raising thing. They were eating solid food now, puppy mush made from his emergency supplies. They were mostly house-trained. They were healthy, active, growing stronger every day. He should have known better than to get comfortable. It started with Tank. The little runt, who was still the smallest by a significant margin but had more personality than his 3 siblings combined, seemed off during the morning feeding. Less enthusiastic. A little slower. Marcus checked him over with practiced hands. Temperature slightly elevated. Nothing alarming, but something to watch. By afternoon, Tank wasn't eating at all. By evening, he was lethargic. barely lifting his head when Marcus spoke to him. By midnight, he was burning up with fever. Marcus's tactical mind kicked in, running through possibilities. Infection? Virus? Something he ate? The other puppies seemed fine, playing and wrestling like always, but Tank was dying. Marcus had seen this before with working dogs downrange. Sometimes puppies just got sick. Sometimes their immune systems couldn't handle the world. Sometimes, despite everything you did, they just faded. No, not this one. Not Tank. Not after everything. Marcus gathered the puppy. So small, so hot, shaking despite the blankets, and held him against his chest. Tank's heart was racing, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Stay with me, buddy," Marcus whispered. "You don't get to quit. Not on my watch." He'd survived 3 years of self-imposed exile without asking for help from anyone. But this was different. This wasn't about him. This was about a life that mattered, a life that had chosen to trust him completely. Marcus grabbed his emergency satellite phone, the one luxury he'd kept, buried in a drawer, never used. His hands shook as he powered it on. The battery was low but functional. He had maybe one shot at this. He dialed the number for the county veterinary emergency line. It rang, and rang, and rang. "Come on, come on. County Animal Emergency. This is Sarah." The voice, human, professional, real, hit Marcus like a physical thing. He hadn't spoken to another person in months. "I need help," he managed. "I have a puppy, maybe 5 weeks old, high fever, lethargic, not eating. He stopped. Where was he exactly? "I'm at the Webb cabin, Upper Ridge, 15 miles past the—" "Sir," Sarah interrupted gently. "Are you Marcus Webb?" The question threw him. "Yes. How did you? Your family has been looking for you for 3 years." Her voice was soft. "But that doesn't matter right now. Tell me about the puppy." Marcus looked down at Tank, at this tiny creature whose life had become more important than his own. He was a stray pup. Mother died after birth. He's the runt. Been doing fine until today. Now he's burning up, shaking. The others are healthy. Temperature. Marcus had checked. 104. Maybe 105. That's high. Could be parvo, could be distemper, could be a dozen things. With his history and age. She paused. "Mr. Webb, he needs immediate veterinary care. For fluids, antibiotics, temperature management. Do you have any medical training?" "Combat medic. Special forces." There was a long pause. "Okay, that helps. Listen carefully." What followed was the longest night of Marcus's life. Following Sarah's instructions, she stayed on the phone for 3 hours, her battery dying before his did. Marcus converted his cabin into a field hospital. He used everything he'd learned keeping teammates alive in impossible conditions. For fluids, he didn't have the proper equipment, but he had drinking water, sugar, salt, and a makeshift dropper system. Subcutaneous administration, the way they'd done with dehydrated locals when proper medical supplies weren't available. Antibiotics, his own emergency supply, dosed down carefully for Tank's weight. Temperature management, cool water baths, careful monitoring, blankets when he shook, cooling when he burned. The other puppies seemed to understand something was wrong. They didn't play. They stayed close, quiet, watching as Marcus worked to save their brother. Scout lay down next to Tank. Bear pressed against his other side. River rested his head on Tank's paw. Brothers standing vigil. "You see this?" Marcus said to Tank, his voice rough. "You see them? They're not giving up on you. Your mom didn't give up on you. And I sure as hell am not giving up on you." He worked through the night with the precision and intensity of a mission. Check vitals every 15 minutes. Adjust treatment. Monitor response. Keep him warm. Keep him hydrated. Keep him alive. The hours blurred. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory from 1,000 midnight watches, 1,000 desperate saves. The training never left you. The purpose never left you. Around 0400, Tank's temperature started to drop. Not much, just half a degree. But it was something. By 0600 he was at 103. By 0800 his eyes opened. And at 0900, when Marcus offered him food, Tank's small tongue licked his finger. Marcus, this warrior who'd seen combat in 3 countries, who'd performed surgeries with pocket knives, who'd carried wounded teammates through hostile fire, sat on his cabin floor and wept like a child. "You made it," he sobbed. "You stubborn, beautiful little pain in my ass. You made it." Tank's tail thumped. Weak, but there. Scout barked once, sharp and joyful. Bear's tail started wagging so hard his whole back end moved. River jumped straight up in the air. And Marcus laughed through his tears, gathering all 4 puppies close, feeling their warmth, their life, their absolute refusal to let him stay broken. "Okay," he said finally, to the puppies, to himself, to Jake's memory. "Okay, you win. I'm done hiding. We've all been there, that moment when you realize you can't do this alone anymore. When the thing you're trying to save ends up saving you instead. That's what's happening here, and if you feel it too, then you're part of this tribe. We're the ones who understand that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up." Subscribe to Silent Trident Stories because we tell the truth about warriors, about redemption, about the fights that really matter. This channel is for people who've been in the dark and found their way back. Are you one of us? Hit subscribe. If you're holding back, tell us why in the comments. This community wants to hear your story. Recovery wasn't instant. Tank spent the next week regaining his strength, eating small amounts, sleeping constantly. But he improved every day, and by day 40 he was back to following Marcus everywhere, stubborn and devoted as ever. But something had changed in Marcus during that long night. The satellite phone call had broken something open, or maybe put something back together. For 3 years, he'd convinced himself that isolation was protection, that if he pushed everyone away, he couldn't hurt them. Tank had proven that theory was bullshit. You couldn't protect people or puppies by abandoning them. You protected them by showing up, by staying, by fighting for them even when you were terrified of failing. Marcus picked up the satellite phone one morning and dialed before he could talk himself out of it. It rang twice. "Hello." The voice was older, more fragile than he remembered. "Mom." The word caught in his throat. "It's Marcus." The sound that came through the phone was something between a sob and a gasp. "Marcus? Oh my God. Marcus. Is it really, are you?" "I'm okay, Mom. I'm in Colorado. In the mountains. I'm safe." 3 years. Her voice broke. 3 years without a word. "We thought, your father thought." "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Where are you?" "We'll come get you. Right now. Your father and I will drive there tonight." "Mom." He had to stop her before the hope in her voice destroyed him. "I need to tell you something first. About Jake. About why I left." The silence on the other end was heavy. "I know why you left, honey," she said finally. "You blame yourself. I should have stopped him. I should have told him not to enlist. I made it seem so." "Marcus, stop." His mother's voice had that tone. The one from childhood that meant she was about to say something he needed to hear. "Jake made his own choice. He was proud to serve. Proud to follow you. And yes, it broke us when we lost him. It broke all of us, including you. But we never blamed you, baby. Never once. Dad couldn't look at me at the funeral. Your father couldn't look at anyone at the funeral. He'd lost his youngest son. He was barely holding himself together. And then you disappeared and we lost you too." She was crying now. "You think we wanted that? You think Jake would have wanted that?" Marcus looked down at Tank, who was chewing contentedly on a rope toy, completely oblivious to the conversation that was reshaping his owner's world. "No," he admitted. "Jake would have kicked my ass." His mother laughed, wet and broken. "He absolutely would have. He'd have told you to stop being dramatic and come home." "I'm not sure I know how to do that anymore." "Come home. I mean, then start small," his mother said. "Tell me where you are. Tell me what you're doing. Tell me who you are now." So Marcus told her. About the cabin. About Amber appearing on his porch. About the puppies. About Tank's illness and the long night when he'd finally remembered what it meant to fight for something besides survival. "You saved them," his mother said when he finished. "They saved me," Marcus corrected. "Then I need to meet these puppies who brought my son back from the dead." Marcus smiled, really smiled. "I think that can be arranged. But Mom, there's something I need to do first. On my own. Something I should have done 3 years ago." The trail down the mountain was treacherous but passable. The spring melt had started, turning the snow into slush and the slush into cascading streams. Marcus had spent 2 weeks preparing for this journey. Gathering supplies, training the puppies for travel, building a custom carrier that would keep them safe. He'd also spent those 2 weeks remembering how to be human. He'd started exercising again, not just the maintenance work he'd been doing, but real training. Push-ups, pull-ups, running through the snow with weighted packs. His body remembered, even if his mind had tried to forget. The discipline, the rhythm, the purpose. The puppies trained with him in their way. He'd constructed an obstacle course in the clearing, teaching them to navigate challenges, to trust him, to work as a team. Scout excelled at everything. Bear was steady and reliable. River needed extra encouragement but had incredible instincts once he committed. And Tank never left his side. If Marcus was running, Tank ran. If Marcus was climbing, Tank tried to climb. The little runt had grown. Still the smallest but tough as nails, with a heart 3 times too big for his body. "You know you're going to have to trust other people eventually," Marcus told him one morning. Tank just looked at him with absolute devotion. "Yeah, I know. I'm working on it too." The morning they started the descent, Marcus stood on his porch one last time, looking at the cabin that had been his prison and his salvation. He'd come here to disappear. Instead, he'd learned how to return. The puppies were loaded in the carrier, secured to his pack frame, a system he'd engineered over weeks. They could see out, could breathe easily, but were protected from the elements and couldn't fall. He had one more thing to do. Marcus hiked to the ridge where Amber was buried. The stone cairn stood solid against the sky. He knelt beside it, placing his hand on the sun-warmed rocks. "Thank you," he said simply, "for being braver than me, for trusting me with the most important thing in the world. I'll make sure they're okay. I promise." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and new growth. Marcus stood, shouldered his pack with its precious cargo, and started down the mountain. The hike took 3 days. 3 days of careful navigation, of setting up camp, of keeping the puppies fed and warm. 3 days of slowly rejoining the world he'd left behind. On the first night, they camped in a small clearing. Marcus set up his tent, made a fire, and let the puppies explore under close supervision. They'd never seen this much space before, never experienced the forest at night. Scout immediately appointed himself pack leader, barking at shadows. Bear investigated everything methodically. River got distracted by a butterfly and wandered too far, requiring rescue. Tank stayed at Marcus's side, venturing out only when Marcus moved. "You're going to have to learn to be a dog," Marcus told him. "Not just my shadow." But even as he said it, he knew it was hypocritical, because Tank was teaching him the same lesson. You could be independent and still need connection. You could be strong and still ask for help. On the second night, they camped near a stream. Marcus bathed the puppies properly for the first time, not just wiping them clean but actually washing them in the cool water. They hated it, all except Tank, who tolerated it because Marcus was doing it. As he worked, Marcus found himself thinking about what came next. He'd made calls from the satellite phone. His parents knew he was coming. They'd arranged for a vet to check the puppies. They'd prepared his old room. But there were other calls he needed to make. Other people he'd abandoned. His SEAL team. The guys he'd served with. They tried to reach out after Jake's death, but Marcus had ghosted them. He'd convinced himself they were better off without him, without his grief and rage and self-destruction. But what if he'd been wrong? What if pushing everyone away wasn't protection? It was just cowardice dressed up as sacrifice. On the third day, they reached the trailhead. His father was waiting. Marcus saw him from 100 yards out. Standing by a truck, hands shoved in pockets, shoulders hunched against the cool mountain air. Older, grayer, but unmistakably his father. Marcus stopped walking. His heart hammered. 3 years of carefully constructed walls threatened to collapse all at once. Then Tank whimpered from the carrier, and Marcus felt small paws press against his back through the fabric. Right? He wasn't alone anymore. He started walking again. His father saw him, straightened, took one step forward, then another. Then he was running. This 68-year-old man who'd lost one son and thought he'd lost another was running through the parking lot. They met in the middle. Marcus dropped his pack carefully, making sure the puppies were stable. Then he was in his father's arms, and his father was holding him like he'd held him as a child, and they were both crying in a trailhead parking lot while curious hikers gave them space. "I'm sorry," Marcus managed. "Dad, I'm so sorry." "You're home," his father said, his voice wrecked. "That's all that matters. You're home." From the carrier, four puppies started barking, wanting to know what all the commotion was about. Marcus's father pulled back, wiping his eyes, and laughed. "Are these the heroes your mother told me about?" "Yeah." Marcus opened the carrier, and the puppies tumbled out. Scout first, investigating this new person with intense focus. Bear next, calm and observant. River darted around, already trying to escape. And Tank, who looked at Marcus's father, then back at Marcus, checking if this new person was safe. Marcus picked Tank up, holding him close. "This is Tank. He's the reason I made it through." His father reached out slowly, letting Tank sniff his hand. The puppy considered, then licked his fingers tentatively. "Then I owe him everything," his father said. They loaded the dogs into the truck. Marcus had made sure his father brought a vehicle suitable for 4 medium-sized puppies. The drive down to town was filled with stories, with catching up, with his father asking careful questions and Marcus giving honest answers. "Are you ready for this?" his father asked as they pulled into familiar streets. "Your mother's invited half the neighborhood. I tried to talk her out of it, but you know how she gets." Marcus thought about it. 3 years ago, the idea of facing people would have sent him back to the mountains. But now, "Yeah," he said, surprising himself. "Yeah, I think I am." His childhood home looked exactly the same. The white fence still needed painting. His mother's garden was already blooming with early spring flowers. The porch light was on even though it was barely evening. And his mother was standing in the doorway. Marcus got out of the truck slowly. The puppies were immediately interested in this new place, straining at their leashes. His father had stopped at a pet store. The first clue that this homecoming had been planned. His mother walked down the steps. She'd aged too. More gray hair, new lines around her eyes. But her smile was the same smile from his childhood. And when she opened her arms, Marcus walked into them like he was 8 years old again. "My boy," she whispered. "My beautiful, stubborn, lost boy. You're home." "I'm home," he agreed. She pulled back to look at him, really look at him, her hands framing his face. "You look different, older. But," she smiled, "there's light in your eyes again. I can see it." Then she looked down at the chaos of puppies around their feet. Scout was already trying to herd everyone. Bear had found a sunny spot and claimed it. River was investigating the garden. And Tank was pressed against Marcus's leg, uncertain about all these new stimuli. And these must be the miracles. His mother knelt down. Carefully, her knees weren't what they used to be, and let the puppies investigate her. "Hello, brave ones. Thank you for bringing him back to us." Scout licked her face enthusiastically. Bear leaned against her, surprisingly gentle. River tried to eat her shoelace. Tank watched from a distance, still pressed against Marcus. "That one's Tank," Marcus said. "He's particular about people." "He loves you," his mother observed. "I can see it from here. He looks at you the way." She stopped, smiled sadly. "The way Jake used to look at you, like you hung the moon." The name didn't hurt the way it used to. Still ached, it would always ache. But now the ache was different. Less like a wound and more like a scar. Evidence of pain, but also evidence of healing. "Yeah," Marcus said softly. "I know." The next weeks were an education in returning to the world. The vet visit first. Dr. Chun was a woman in her 50s who'd been practicing for 30 years and had apparently served as a combat veterinarian herself. She examined all 4 puppies with expert hands and pronounced them healthy, albeit somewhat unconventionally raised. "You did good work," she told Marcus. "Keeping them alive without their mother, in those conditions, that takes skill and dedication." "I had good motivation," Marcus replied, watching Tank investigate the examination room with suspicion. "So I hear." Dr. Chun smiled. "Your mother may have called ahead. She's very proud of you, and very grateful to these puppies." The vaccinations were next, then microchips, then a long discussion about nutrition and training and socialization. The puppies needed to interact with other dogs, other people. They needed experiences beyond Marcus's cabin and family home. "Especially this one," Dr. Chun said, gently handling Tank. "He's bonded very closely to you. That's beautiful, but he needs to learn independence too. For his sake." Marcus knew she was right, but knowing and doing were different things. The first time he left Tank with his parents to run an errand, the puppy's cries followed him out the door and haunted him the entire 20 minutes he was gone. When he returned, Tank was hoarse from barking, and Marcus's mother looked exhausted. "He never stopped," she said. "Not once. Just sat by that door and cried. I'm sorry. I should have." "No." His mother put a hand on his arm. "You need to live your life, Marcus. That puppy needs to learn that you come back. That's how trust works. You leave, you come back. You leave, you come back. What if I don't come back?" The question came out before Marcus could stop it. What if something happens and then these puppies will grieve and heal and live full lives, because that's what we do, his mother said firmly. "Jake's gone. That's our reality. But you're here. You're alive. And you don't honor his memory by hiding from the world. You honor it by living." She was right. Marcus knew she was right, but knowing and doing were still different things. The real test came 3 weeks after his descent from the mountain. Marcus's former team leader called. Brian Hawk Hawkins, the man who'd recruited Marcus to the SEALs, who'd been his mentor and friend for 15 years. "Heard through the grapevine you're back in civilization," Hawk said without preamble. "Want to meet for coffee?" Marcus's first instinct was to say no, to make an excuse, to retreat to the safety of his parents' house and the puppies and the small world he'd been rebuilding. But Tank was watching him from across the room, those dark eyes somehow knowing this was important. "Yeah," Marcus heard himself say. "Coffee sounds good." They met at a diner in town. Marcus arrived early, old habits, and took a seat facing the door. Scout, Bear, and River were at his parents' house. Tank was with him because Tank was always with him. Hawk walked in right on time, looking older but still dangerous, still carrying himself like the warrior he was. He spotted Marcus immediately, crossed the room, and stuck out his hand. "Good to see you, brother." Marcus shook it, the familiar grip grounding him. "You too." They ordered coffee, made small talk, danced around the real conversation. Finally, Hawk said, "We looked for you. After Jake's funeral. You dropped off the face of the earth. I needed to disappear. We knew that. Didn't mean we stopped looking." Hawk sipped his coffee. "You know Parker? Tech guy, always on his laptop." "Yeah. He tracked you to Colorado. Knew you were in the mountains somewhere. We could have come after you, but..." Hawk shrugged. "You're a SEAL, Marcus. If you don't want to be found, you won't be found. So we waited. Hoped you'd come back when you were ready. I didn't think I'd ever be ready." "What changed?" Marcus looked down at Tank, who was lying on his boots, ever vigilant. "I found something worth protecting again." Hawk followed his gaze, smiled. "Heard about that. Your mom's been telling everyone about the miracle puppies. They're not a miracle. They're just dogs." "Bullshit." Hawk's voice was gentle but firm. "They're the reason you're sitting here instead of drinking yourself to death on a mountain. That sounds like a miracle to me." They talked for 2 hours. About Jake. About guilt. About the weight of command and the cost of service. About the men they'd lost and the men who'd made it home. about survivor's guilt and the lies it tells. You didn't kill Jake, Hawk said finally. The enemy killed Jake. War killed Jake. Bad luck and IEDs and the chaos of combat killed Jake. Not you. I inspired him. You inspired him to be brave, to serve something bigger than himself. That's not a crime, Marcus. That's what leaders do. Then why does it feel like I murdered him? Because grief isn't logical. Hawk leaned forward. Listen to me. I've commanded men for 20 years. Some of them died. Some of them came home broken. And every single death, every single injury I felt responsible for. But you know what I learned? Taking responsibility and taking blame are different things. I'm responsible for my team, for their training, their readiness, their welfare. But I'm not to blame when the universe does its thing. Neither are you. Under the table, Tank shifted, pressing closer against Marcus's leg. The team wants to see you, Hawk continued. Whenever you're ready. No pressure. No expectations. Just, we miss you, man. We're your family too. Marcus thought about it. About facing his old teammates. About stepping back into that world. A week ago, the idea would have terrified him. Now, give me a month, he said. I need to get the dogs settled. Need to figure out what's next. But, yeah, I'd like that. Hawk grinned. Good, because Parker's dying to meet these miracle puppies. He's already planning to code an app to track their training or some tech nerd thing. Despite everything, Marcus laughed. Of course he is. When they stood to leave, Hawk pulled Marcus into a bear hug. The kind of embrace warriors give each other, acknowledging shared trauma and shared survival. Welcome back, brother, Hawk said. We've got you. Whatever you need. I know, Marcus replied. And for the first time in 3 years, he believed it. Have you ever noticed how the people who save us rarely realize they're doing it? Marcus thought he was saving these puppies. What he didn't know, what he couldn't see yet, was that they were teaching him the hardest lesson of all. That being strong doesn't mean facing everything alone. Comment below. Who saved you when you didn't know you needed saving? Your story matters to us. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the backyard of his new place. A small house on the edge of town with a big yard and a fence the puppies couldn't escape, though they weren't really puppies anymore. At 9 months old, Scout was nearly full-grown, a magnificent golden retriever who'd taken his role as pack leader seriously. Bear was steady and calm, the peacemaker. River had finally settled down, channeling his energy into dock diving competitions where he was becoming locally famous. And Tank was still small, still devoted, but he'd learned to be okay when Marcus left. It had taken months of patient training, of careful departures and consistent returns, of building trust that Marcus would always come back. Now Tank had his own purpose, therapy dog in training. It turned out that a dog who understood trauma, who'd learned to trust again after abandonment, who could sit with someone in their darkness without trying to fix them. That dog was invaluable in helping veterans like Marcus. They'd started volunteering at the VA hospital 3 months ago. Just Marcus and Tank at first, visiting with vets who were struggling. Tank had a gift for knowing who needed him most. He'd find the quietest person in a room, the one sitting alone, and simply exist beside them. No demands, no expectations, just presence. Marcus had watched grown men cry into Tank's fur, had seen the same breakthrough in their eyes that he'd experienced on that mountain. The realization that maybe, just maybe, they were worth saving too. Today was special though. Today was the day Marcus had been working toward for 6 months. The doorbell rang. Marcus opened it to find Hawk standing there, along with 3 other men from their old SEAL team. Parker, the tech guy, Rodriguez, the joker, and Chun, the quiet one who always saw more than he said. Ready for this? Hawk asked. Marcus looked back at his house, at the 4 dogs watching from the window. Scout alert, Bear calm, River bouncing, Tank waiting. He thought about Amber, buried on a mountain ridge. He thought about Jake, whose watch he still carried but no longer controlled him. Yeah, Marcus said. I'm ready. They drove to the community center, where Marcus had organized something he'd never thought he'd have the courage to do. A support group for veterans dealing with loss. The room was full. 20 men and women, various ages, all carrying the same weight Marcus had carried to that mountain. All looking for a reason to keep fighting. Marcus stood at the front, Tank sitting beside him, and spoke. "My name is Marcus Webb. 3 years ago, my younger brother was killed in action. He'd followed me into the military. He'd looked up to me his whole life. And when he died, I decided it was my fault. I decided I was poison, that everyone I cared about would get hurt. So I isolated myself. Went to live on a mountain where I couldn't hurt anyone else." He paused, looking around the room. Saw recognition in their eyes. But isolation isn't protection. It's just slow death dressed up as sacrifice. And I might have died up there if not for this dog and his mother and his brothers. He told them the story. About Amber showing up on his porch. About the puppies. About the long night when Tank almost died and Marcus realized he had to fight. About coming down the mountain and learning to trust again. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's easy," he said. "It's not. Some days I still wake up and think about going back to that cabin. Some days the guilt is still there, loud as ever. But here's what I learned. You can't outrun grief. You can't punish yourself into feeling better. And you sure as hell can't heal in isolation." A woman in the front row was crying. An older man in the back had his arms crossed, jaw tight, fighting emotion. "What you can do," Marcus continued, "is wake up, feed the dogs, do the next right thing, show up for the people and the animals who need you. Because here's the truth they don't tell you about warriors. Our job isn't just to fight. It's to protect, to serve, to care for the vulnerable. And sometimes the most vulnerable person in the room is you." After the meeting, people approached him, shook his hand, shared their stories, made plans to come back next week. The woman who'd been crying knelt beside Tank, who let her stroke his fur while she sobbed. "I lost my son," she said. 8 months ago. I haven't been able to. I can't seem to." "I know," Marcus said softly. "Tank knows too. That's why he's here." She looked up at him, this stranger who understood. "Does it get better?" Marcus thought about it. About the long road from that mountain to this moment. About the scars that would never fully heal but no longer defined him. "It gets different," he said honestly. "The pain doesn't go away, but it changes. Becomes something you can live with. Something that makes you stronger instead of destroying you. And you don't have to do it alone." After everyone left, Marcus's old team helped him clean up. They moved chairs, folded tables, worked together the way they'd done 100 times before. "That was good what you did today," Hawk said. "Important. Felt terrifying. The important things usually do." They loaded the last of the equipment into Rodriguez's truck. Parker showed Marcus the app he designed, not just for tracking dog training, but for coordinating veteran support groups. Chun invited Marcus to join their weekly workout sessions. "Just like old times," Rodriguez joked. "Except now we're old." "Speak for yourself," Hawk shot back. Marcus smiled, watching them banter, feeling the warmth of belonging. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother, with a photo of Scout, Bear, and River cuddled together on her couch. "Your dad and I took the troublemakers for the afternoon. They're fine. Tank's probably ready to come home though." Marcus looked down at Tank, who'd been patient through the whole meeting, but was definitely ready for dinner and their evening walk. "What do you say, buddy? Ready to go home?" Tank's tail wagged, and Marcus could swear he saw understanding in those dark eyes. Not just recognition, but something deeper. Purpose. Both of them had found their purpose on that mountain. Not in isolation, but in connection. Not in hiding from pain, but in transforming it into something useful. They walked to the truck, Tank trotting beside him, no longer needing a leash because trust went both ways now. The evening air was cool, touched with spring. Somewhere in the mountains Marcus had left behind, snow was melting, and wildflowers were beginning to bloom. He thought about Amber, who'd given him everything with her last breaths. About Jake, who'd have been proud of what his brother was building. About all the broken people who were slowly learning, like Marcus, that broken didn't mean destroyed. It just meant human. Marcus loaded Tank into the truck, then paused before getting in. He pulled out the watch, Jake's watch, and looked at it in the fading light. It still read 3:47. It would always read 3:47. But that was okay, because time didn't need to move forward for Marcus to move forward. The past could stay the past. Jake could stay in his heart without controlling his future. He got in the truck, started the engine, and drove home. Behind him, the mountains stood eternal. The place where he died and been reborn. The place where a dying dog had taught him the most important lesson of all. You save what you love, and in saving it, you save yourself. Tank made a small sound and rested his head on Marcus's leg. I know, Marcus said softly. I love you too, buddy. Let's go home. And as they drove through town, past familiar streets and friendly faces, past the community center where healing was beginning, past all the evidence that life continued and joy was possible and redemption was real, Marcus finally believed he deserved it. All of it. The mountains had taught him to survive. The puppies had taught him to live. If you made it this far, you're not just a viewer, you're part of this mission. Every warrior knows that the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought in the quiet moments when you have to decide. Give up or get up. Marcus chose to get up. Amber chose to trust. Tank chose to love. And today you chose to hear this story. That matters. Subscribe to Silent Trident Stories if you believe in second chances, in healing, in the idea that broken things can become beautiful again. This channel exists for warriors of all kinds, military, civilian, anyone who's fought their own battles and needs to know they're not alone. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling us, what's your mountain? What's the thing you're carrying that you think makes you unworthy of redemption? Share it with us. This community sees you. We've got your back. Are you ready to come down from the mountain? Then subscribe now. Silent Trident Stories, where warriors find their way home.